Hello YouTube, this is Morgan Airspeed Prime here with my next Avatar news update video. This time out we have just one piece of news, and that is that there is going to be a live episode of the podcast Avatar Braving the Elements at San Diego Comic-Con this weekend. Now you may be a bit surprised at being like, wait, didn't we already have San Diego Comic-Con? It's in like July, isn't it? Not November. This is where you have to remember, because SDCC was an at-home digital event, primarily, they actually also announced like a special edition Comic-Con for later in the year, like November. So that's what this is. I've seen very little build up to this event, full stop, to the point where I only found out about this like a day or two ago. And I was meant to talk about this in yesterday's video, but I was so focused on the new book announcement that this completely slipped my mind, which I just think says the whole thing. There is, I think, very little to be excited about this thing. This is just another live episode of the podcast, and I've got to say, as the months have gone on, and we're gonna get next month to 6 months of this podcast being out, I've just grown to care less and less about this podcast. And especially after the New York Comic Con live podcast, it just became clear. This is just the exact same panel as before, but arguably worse, because you don't have the comic creators to talk about anything that's happened recently. You have all these restrictions that are in place because for some reason on the podcast they've decided that they're going to keep the podcast spoiler free up to the point at which they're at. And then you add on to that the fact that they're going through the series so slowly. They're like 5.5 months in, and they're only just reviewing The Storm this week. The Storm. They should be closer to the end of book 1. At this point, realistically, they probably should be finished book 1. It's so slow. So they're keeping this spoiler thing up because they have listeners who are following along with them, apparently. I don't get that. I really don't understand why you would do that. And the whole foreshadow report thing, every time they consider talking about something, it's just so frustrating listening to this podcast. And it's to the point where I think I haven't listened to any of the last 4 podcasts that they've put out, including certain interviews, because the podcast has just made me really double down on my opinion that I do not particularly care about voice actor interviews. Even most Mike and Brian interviews I don't think are that interesting, especially ones that are done by people who are sort of like insiders and aren't actually asking fan questions. So I don't think anything is going to be happening here, unless they suddenly decide to go over some publishing news that maybe they've been officially given. But the podcast has never given the impression that it is a news podcast. And the New York Comic Con panel, the biggest thing is this. This is the only thing I really said about this. I think I mentioned it in my video about it as well. I only saw one person live tweeting out of that panel at New York Comic Con, and to me this was the only significant thing that they actually said. None of them know what's coming out from Avatar Studios. They all hope they'll be involved, of course, but they're mostly happy that there will be more from the universe. And this is the official Avatar podcast, hosted by 2 of the main voice actors for 2 of the main characters. And it's basically just official fan podcast. There's no sort of insider news or anything like that at all related to this, and that takes away any interest that I have, because that's the thing here, that these panels are ultimately for the people who are going to be there in person, and they're there for sort of casual fans who have never seen a panel before. Because if you've seen like 2-3 of these convention panels, you know exactly what they are. You know exactly the questions that they're going to be asked when they get to the Q&A section, and that's it. Like, what are they doing here? Are they reviewing an episode? What are they talking about? Like, they don't seem like they have a guest. If they were going to surprise us with news, they would have to tease at least that Mike and Brian are going to be on, and that is not here at all. There's so little hype behind this as well. Like, both of the official accounts, the Avatar account and the Korra account, posted about this. 2 days for the Korra account, 1 day for the Avatar account. Look how weak this is. Like 233 likes, 3 shares from an account that has 4.7 million people who like the page. And I think it's somewhat similar for the Korra page. I don't think it has quite as many, but I think it's over 1 million. Only just over 200 likes, 2 comments, 13 shares. People aren't excited for this. People don't really know about this. And now we know not to really expect anything as well from the panel. I don't know. It's just one of those things where, like, it's been super surprising that, like, probably one of the bigger things that happened this year was the launch of the podcast. And it's now become this, for me, super forgettable thing. That I sort of realized in reflection, a lot of why I was listening to it at the start was just because it's an official Avatar thing. I should be listening to this because I'm an Avatar fan. But I'm like, wait, I've reviewed every episode of Avatar and Korra like 4 times across the podcast, the site, my channel. They aren't really bringing enough to the table to make me want to listen to their podcast just because it's Janet Varney and Dante Bosco. Some of the interviews are kind of fun, but like I said, for the most part, I've never particularly found voice actor interviews all that interesting. And even Mike and Brian interviews are only interesting if they get asked good questions, which most of the time they're not. So, I don't know. My expectations for this are basically in the negative. I don't think anything is going to come out of this. I'd be absolutely shocked if anything came out of this. Even though arguably, now is a decent time for them to use a platform like this to say something about Avatar Studios. Because, we're getting to the point where it's, I guess, 9 months since the announcement, getting towards 10 months since the announcement. And then we've got to assume that they've been working on Avatar Studios for at least a month or 2 before they actually made the announcement. So they've been in the planning stage for at least a year now. Nothing to say still. Like, the big thing that I'm on now is that publicly what they've said is the movie is the first thing that's going into production. And they say that was going to go into production later in the year. It is now later in the year. Is it in production right now? Are we still waiting for it to go into production? Are you going to tell us when it goes into production? When it does go into production, are you going to announce what it is? That's the sort of stuff where I'm like, now actually seems like the ideal place to do that. Because if you are having it go into production, you know what it is, you know what you're doing. You have to have at least some sense for like the concept stuff ready to go. Is there nothing you can show us? But I don't think this is the place that does it. Because they never have before. Like I said, I just posted the tweet. They're not involved with Avatar Studios unless they are chosen to play a role in one of the shows. So we'll see what happens here. I hope we get some Avatar Studios update before the end of the year, but I don't think this is where it's going to be. Because I think more people would be talking about this if there was even the chance, and no one really is. So that's where I'm going to pretty much wrap this one up. In the comments, let me know what your thoughts are on another live Braving the Elements podcast at San Diego Comic-Con, apparently. So yeah, that's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.